For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. When you watch a football game, what's one of the things you're paying attention to on the broadcast? That's right, the scores from around the league. You see those updates on the bottom of the screen or at the top of the screen depending on the network, and you want to know how certain teams around the league are doing. Maybe you're a Dolphins fan, and you want to know how the Bills are doing because you're both fighting for the AFC East. So you're just waiting for that ticker to come around and show an update on the Bills game. Maybe you put some big money down on one game, and you want to see how that bet is doing, but you're watching your team or whatever game is on in your local area, so that's how you're staying updated. People rely on these score updates, and understandably so, especially during a time when you didn't have smartphones, when you didn't have the internet, and when you had no real idea what was happening around the league aside from the occasional update provided by the network. So what if you were watching one of these games and were in reliance on the scoreboard? And as it turned out, the score wasn't even remotely true. The score was just completely made up and was a complete fabrication. And I don't mean a situation like New York leading Philadelphia 13-7, and the network shows that, but upon further review, they went to instant replay and took New York's touchdown off the board, so it was 7-7. And I don't mean a situation where someone just typed in the wrong number to the wrong team, like Dallas leading San Francisco 10-7 when it was the other way around, and San Francisco was actually the one up 10-7. I'm not talking about a simple, innocent mistake like that. I'm talking about a score that, quite literally, never happened. Well, during this game right here that you've been watching, a 1987 battle between the now division rival Atlanta Falcons and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, even though they weren't rivals at the time, that's exactly what happened when CBS just decided, completely out of thin air, to make up a score for one of their games. Spoiler alert, it didn't work out. And nearly 4 decades later, we're taking a deep dive at that today. Because this is the story behind one of the strangest broadcasting controversies of the entire 1987 season, and how CBS just lied to the public for no reason. Before I talk about the actual incident in question and how stupid it was, we need some context to understand not just the importance of the football game at hand and how it was going, but the importance of the other, way bigger game, depending on your fandom and where your allegiances lied. It's September 13th, 1987. It's the opening day of a brand new NFL season, and we've got a battle on our hands down at Tampa Stadium in the NFC between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Atlanta Falcons. This is a big game for both of these teams, and not just because it's the opening day of the season and you want to get off on the right foot, but because history shows it is way better to be 1-0 than to be 0-1. I know that seems incredibly obvious, but if you look at the 10 teams to make the playoffs during the 1986 season the year before, 8 of them, so 80% of them if you're doing the math at home, won during the opening week of the season. And in the NFC the year before that, in 1985, 4 of the 5 teams to make the playoffs, including all 3 division winners, won their opening game of the year. Both of these teams had struggled throughout the mid-80s, having not made the playoffs since the strike-shortened season in 1982. So to start the year off 1-0 and to get on the right track would be much needed. As for how this game went, well, this was a complete and utter demolition, to the point where you could make a legitimate argument that in the just over decade-long history of the Buccaneers at the time, this was the greatest game they had played up until that point. When the final whistle sounded, the Buccaneers didn't just beat the Falcons, they completely decimated them, taking the game by a final score of 48-10, with a 38-point win, which was a 6-score game at the time because there was no 2-point conversion, being the largest win in franchise history, and being the largest win up until a 41-0 win against the Chicago Bears in 2000. Everything that could have gone right for Tampa Bay on this day did. Quarterback Steve DeBerg had one of his best days as a pro, throwing 5 touchdown passes and 333 yards. Tampa Bay had nearly 2.5 times the total yardage that Atlanta had, winning that battle 460 to 197. Whereas Tampa never got sacked during the game, Atlanta's quarterbacks got brought down in the backfield 4 times. Tampa Bay held on to the ball for over 38 minutes, having roughly 2/3 of the total possession, which is pretty good. Tampa Bay had more than double the first downs that Atlanta had, winning that battle 30-13. And in case you need any more evidence that Atlanta's offense struggled mightily on this day, starting quarterback David Archer went 8 for 22, completing 36% of his passes for just 70 net passing yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a passer rating of 12.3, which is worse than if he did nothing but spiked the ball into the ground on every single play. Remember, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft in each of the past 2 seasons, and were projected to be the worst team in football. So for them to do this and just destroy Atlanta by 38 points was completely unexpected. As you can clearly tell from the highlights of this game, everything about this game from Atlanta's perspective was ugly with a capital U. However, let's be honest, this game was a blip on the radar for most sports fans on this day. Unsurprisingly, the game was blacked out in Tampa Bay due to Tampa Stadium not being sold out in time. Nobody had high hopes for either of these teams, and this was the least anticipated matchup during an already not very anticipated NFL season, relatively speaking, due to the looming strike just a week away. CBS had 6 games during Week 1, and they sent their lowest announcing pairing of the 6, including play-by-play man James Brown, to this game. As a side note, to learn more about this announcer pairing, click the card in the upper right corner. In other words, this was the equivalent of a modern-day game with Tom McCarthy, James Lofton, and Jay Feely in the booth. So what game were most people paying attention to on this day? What was the game that was captivating the sporting nation? Oddly enough, for a lot of people, it wasn't a football game. Rather, it was a game in Major League Baseball in the National League. As in, this game right here. A battle at Shea Stadium between the New York Mets and the St. Louis Cardinals. At the time in the sport, this was the biggest series of the year. In one corner entering this game, you had the St. Louis Cardinals, who were 83-57 and were leading the NL East by 3 games with 3 weeks to go. In the other corner, you had the defending World Series champions, the New York Mets, who were 80-61 and were in second place in the division, trailing, you guessed it, the Cardinals. As a side note, to learn more about the Mets and how they won the 1986 World Series, which is their most recent World Series win as of this video getting released, click the card in the upper right corner. The Cardinals won the first 2 games of the series, with St. Louis taking the Friday game 6-4 in 10 innings, and with St. Louis blowing the Mets out 8-1 in the Saturday game, and with the Cardinals righting the ship after losing 6 of their last 8 games, entering the Mets series, and being in danger of losing their grip on the division. If the Cardinals won this game on Sunday, they'd sweep the Mets, they'd extend their lead on the NL East, they would be up by 4 games in the division, and barring a shocking collapse, they would be a lock to make the playoffs. Because remember that back in 1987, there was no wild card, so you had to win your division to make the playoffs. If the Mets won this game, they would keep their season alive. And remember, this was at a time where baseball was absolutely massive. The NFL had overtaken MLB by this point, but it wasn't so much the NFL as the undisputed kings and baseball as a distant second, so much as it was a 1 and a 1A situation. Game 7 of the 1986 World Series 1 year before was estimated to be the most watched baseball game of all time, even though it went up against Monday Night Football. That game garnered anywhere from 55 to 60 million viewers. The World Series was averaging well over 30 million viewers per game. When NFL teams had scheduling conflicts with MLB teams in the same stadium, the MLB team won out more often than not. When television networks and affiliates had to choose between airing a Sunday baseball playoff game or an NFL regular season game, Often, they chose the Sunday baseball playoff game. Baseball score updates were routine parts of NFL broadcasts, and segments during pregame and postgame shows for the NFL would be devoted specifically to baseball, which seems almost unfathomable today. So if you were watching this Falcons-Buccaneers game right here, and you love baseball, you were probably wondering what the heck was happening in the Cardinals-Mets game and in that critical battle for NL East supremacy, especially because baseball was huge and that was the biggest game. And remember, back in 1987, score updates were sparse and infrequent. There was no bottom line ticker like there is today with constant score updates. And even though NBC was pretty good at showing scores by this point, introducing the 10-minute ticker in 1986 to provide updates every 10 minutes on the happenings around the NFL and in the sporting world, CBS was pretty late to the party and didn't provide a ton. And also remember, you were in complete reliance on the network to get it right when they showed a score update. You didn't have a computer. Leagues didn't have websites where you could check the score. And unless you wanted to pay a 900 number to get score updates, your only way to know the scores at this exact moment was to hope that CBS would show it. With that in mind, in the fourth quarter of this Falcons-Bucs game that you've been watching, sometime around 3:25 Eastern, with the Buccaneers leading 41-3 and driving the Falcons into the dirt, play-by-play man James Brown went on the mic and announced to the country what was happening in the Cardinals-Mets game.
In baseball, New York Mets leading St. Louis. Mets have lost 2 to the Cardinals.
Getting back in that stretch run now. They're coming back strong.
And Montreal actually is in second place. They're leading Chicago by the score of 1-0 that game in the second inning.
All right, innocent enough. The Mets were leading the game 2-1 in the fourth inning. Or I guess the fourth inning? Because that's a pretty funny and bad typo. But obviously, I wouldn't be doing this super long video about a typo like that. That'd be a waste of everyone's time. However, there was just one small problem with this. There was just one teeny tiny problem that we need to talk about that, I don't know, seems like a slight oversight, and seems like it might be a bit of an issue. Maybe. Oh yeah, that's right. That was not the score of the game. And I don't mean that someone in the truck typed in the score wrong and it was really the Cardinals leading 2-1. Or it was the second inning instead of the fourth inning. Or anything along those lines. No. The game had not happened yet. This game right here, the Cardinals-Mets game, let me show you what was happening at the time that this score update was announced. We were in a rain delay. The game was supposed to start at 1:35 Eastern. However, the start of the game was delayed by 90 minutes because of rain in the area. So the game did not start until 3:15. I don't know about you, but there is no possible way that you could be in the fourth inning of a baseball game at 3:25 that started at 3:15. Even today, I know that Rob Manfred wants to speed the game up, but I don't see a scenario where that happens. However, it gets even crazier, because once this game right here started, it got delayed again. Vince Coleman hit a leadoff single for the Cardinals, and then Mets starting pitcher David Cone threw 3 pitches to Ozzie Smith before the tarp was put on yet again for another 1 hour and 41 minutes. Why they resumed the game only to have it delayed about 5 pitches later, I don't know. Someone screwed up big time there, but regardless, this Cardinals-Mets game, at the time of this announcement on CBS, it was 0-0 with about 5 pitches thrown in the top of the first, and a genuine concern that the game would not be played. The game did not resume in full until sometime around 5 o'clock Eastern, so honest to God, I have no clue how they got that score. They just pulled it out of thin air, and I wasn't the only one to notice, because this made news publications who wondered just what the heck CBS was doing. And furthermore, CBS should have known this and known that there was no possible way that this was the score of the game. Why? Because at 4 o'clock Eastern, as in right after the Falcons-Bucs game, CBS was set to show this event right here. the men's final of the US Open in tennis. The US Open takes place in Flushing, quite literally next door to where the Mets played at Shea Stadium. Literally, today, if you've ever been to the US Open, you're more likely than not parking in the lot at Citi Field. The train station is a dual stop for the Mets and the US Open. They're in the same complex, almost like how the Kansas City Chiefs and the Kansas City Royals are in the same complex. And CBS knew that they would be unable to show the final of the US Open because it was downpouring, and it was getting moved to Monday. It was postponed. So riddle me this. How is it possible for the final of the US Open to not be played due to bad weather? Because you can't play tennis in pouring rain. But at the same exact time, in the same exact location, it's possible for a baseball game to be played where you can't play baseball in those conditions. That doesn't make any sense. It would be like if the Chiefs and the Royals were supposed to play at home at the same time, and the Chiefs game got postponed because the roads were too unsafe, but the Royals game could happen. There was no logic there. CBS had no idea what it was doing, and just made up a score to appease baseball fans, even if the score wasn't true, and even if the game wasn't happening. And I did some digging to find out the scores of every other game across the National League at the time, just to see if maybe, just maybe, the person working the truck accidentally typed in the score from one game under Cardinals Mets. It wouldn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, as CBS was just showing the scores from 2 games, since they were only showing the NL East scores of the 3 teams that were still in the playoff hunt, with the Cardinals, the Mets, and then right behind them, the Montreal Expos. But I just wanted to see what was happening when it came to this game right here. Across the National League, the only other game that started at the same time as Cardinals-Mets, and could have conceivably been in the 4th inning, was the battle between the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Philadelphia Phillies, which was a meaningless game between 2 teams with no shot at the playoffs. The score through 4 innings in that one was 3-1 Pirates, and the Pirates were the road team, so it's not like you can mistake that for a 2-1 Mets lead over the Cardinals in a game where the Mets are the home team. You can't possibly screw this up. Nothing about this makes any sense. They just pulled random numbers out and said, I declare this to be the score of the game. And obviously, that's not how this works. You can't just make up a score and say that this is the score of the game. But CBS did. Oh man, did CBS do that here. Now, as for what happened after the incident between these 2 teams behind me right here in the Falcons-Bucks game, you're never going to believe what happened next in the baseball game between the Cardinals and the Mets. So the Mets won the game 4-2. They avoided the sweep and stayed alive and kept their hopes of winning the NL East alive. But at the end of 4 innings, guess what the score was? Mets 2, Cardinals 1. The 4th inning ended sometime around 6 o'clock Eastern, and the score update was at 3:25. So CBS somehow was right on the money with the score, even if they were 2.5 hours early. Maybe they time traveled. Maybe the game was rigged. I don't know. But somehow, by a complete stroke of luck and completely accidentally, CBS actually got the score right on the money, even if it was super premature and super, super early. I don't want to say that CBS dodged a bullet here, because they didn't. They lied, and they were caught red-handed by a lot of people in that lie. But if they were going to lie, this was the best case scenario. So what's the moral of the story here? If you're going to report on the score of a game, make sure the score is, accurate. Make sure at a bare minimum that the game you're reporting on actually happened. Especially if people are in reliance of you for that information, because you are the only source that people have available at their disposal, and especially if this is the biggest game of the season in the eyes of many people, you have to get it right. You just have to, especially when it's something blatantly obvious like this. Because when it came to what transpired during this Falcons-Bucks game in 1987, when people saw the Mets-Cardinals score that CBS reported on, only to find out that the game hadn't even happened yet, it left a lot of baseball fans who love the Bucks saying, "What the buck?" Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.